Hi, I'm Pietro Polsinelli, and here I want to talk about a feasible approach to team sports games development. Whereby feasible, I mean something that even a solo dev, as mostly I am, can do. Now, I have developing team sports games simulator in very different forms for a few years now. Um, for in particularly for two commercial games, Football Drama and Roller Drama. Football Drama released in 2019 and Roller Drama just released now. I for some commissioned work I developed like a replay framework for football actions, and I did consulting job for several other commercial sports games. So in doing so, I've also developed like between 6, 7 different kinds of prototypes of games. So in particular, in the case of Football Drama, I developed let me remember, a full simulation, then a strategic approach, and then just a very simple model with just two choices and action replay, which is in the originally mobile game Football Drama. In the case of Roller Drama, I had more time. First, I developed a completely turn-based roller derby, which is a contact sport on skate simulator, which was very good for expressing the rules, but the dynamic of the sports didn't work. Then I did a completely real-time gameplay prototype, but again the sport was too confusing, and so if the game that actually came out is actually a mix of the two, real-time and strategic pause and choices. Anyway, so as creating prototypes of team sports game can be very complex and costly and time consuming, and I did so many mistakes in creating them. Maybe here I can suggest to help you avoid repeating the same mistakes I did, so creating your own original ones. Okay, now to this talk, there are these slides, and but also there is other material. There's a spreadsheet that I'll link to, and there are GIFs and this kind of stuff. It will be all linked in the notes of the video and of the post. Okay. There's an old video. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is that there's an old video of mine which has a lot of views about this topic, and not that it's completely wrong, but some things are a bit outdated, and also that video and the examples that you have here are mostly from Unity game development, but actually what I'm talking about is valid in general. It's not linked, specially linked to Unity. Okay, there's a book on sports game design called Fundamentals of Sports Game Design, from which let's say you can get some advice. It's very short. It's not an amazing book, and quite expensive, but some things about terminology can be useful. We'll get back to it anyway later. But so one thing confusing in sports, in video game about sports, is the notion of player. I mean, it's the player of the video game, or it's like the characters in the game that are actually playing. So we can use player for the video game player and athlete for the athletes playing the inside the game. Anyway, so the video is divided into section which are understanding what is actually the problem, specific problem with team sports games, modeling the complexity, reducing combinatorial complexity, and then creating prototypes, and then make the prototypes prettier, let's say. So I think the very first step needed is to reach an awareness of the complexity of the subject matter that you have to deal with. So in the case of football, for example, it's just 22 pounds bouncing a sphere. How hard can that be? This could be a very naive approach to the problem. Well, actually, this is wrong on so many levels. So, for example, in football, there are the way that the pawns, so to say, move in the field is involves a lot of reasoning and intelligence at so many levels. So, for example, if you wanna just model like a keep possession, just keeping possession means that not just the players with the ball, not just the player that is passing and the player that is receiving, but so many other players are involved in making the passing and receiving, the constant passing, like for example in the case of like a sort of tiki-taka. The whole team has to move intelligently and dynamically according to what the other team is moving in order to allow this passing. And so it's not just a passing and receiver player that have to have a sort of good AI, but this involves dynamically, in a dynamically changing situation, all the other players. And this is a very simple case. And let's see what was I focusing here in my notes. Yeah, this is one is keep possession, and the other is like, so keeping and defending possession also has an influence, is influenced by how marking is working, how zones are defined, how offside also has to be always kept in mind, so how tight the two teams are maintained. And of course this also interacts with the available energy, because making the other team run after the ball all the time is actually should be consuming their energy more than yours, because as they say, the ball runs in place of you running. So that's why one of the reasons why teams use these techniques. And yeah, and one thing I was already hinting at is like creating space. I think I have GIFs here that refer to that almost and more. Like another thing, very basic technique is like the forwards, that when they're moving, that they should in certain cases run at angles, that is move in positions so that they are in between the two defenders. Okay, and this probably has to be coordinated with the other forwards, in the sense that if they do exactly the same thing, this may not create the space that is needed. But you see here, so if we have an algorithm that basically on the defense side tries to keep zones and marking forwards, the fact that the forward moves at angles creates a space between the two defenders where he or she can act. Okay, I think I already hinted here to many different kinds of spatial reasoning and at different levels, and we'll get to that. And I'll give you an example that could help you in defining which are the different levels of reasoning that your players and team have to consider, and that your code has to formalize somehow. But here seems all linked to my example being about football, but in a case of very different sport, which is the case of roller derby. Like in this here, I'm pointing to the example of the fact that the blockers that have to block the opposing jammer from passing their defense, they have to at the same time think about stopping the other jammer, but also not also they can be easing their own jammer to pass through the defense, so they're both in attack and defense at the same time, which is again a non-trivial to model. Okay, so in this path where you will be realizing the levels that may be involved in modeling, in what you have to kind of reasoning that you had that the players are doing in sports, and for which if you ever played agonistic sports, or you have, in my case, my kid doing that, they get trained for hours and hours in adding to personal techniques the fact that they always have to think about their positions and what the other positions, and in continuously following the coach orders, change tactics. So it's not fixed what their position. Of course, it has to make sense. So for this, I think it's useful to think about of having sort of center of gravity of the team and a center of gravity of the action that is happening. But at the same time, they have to be capable of thinking of the relative positions with all the others, and like if when they're assigned a role, they have to be able of swapping roles and things like this. So because I think that as a developer, you of course need to somehow start somewhere and start from very discrete concepts. So one thing you may think, the only level you may think at the beginning is just what every single player has to worry about. That is like when they have the ball, when they have control, they have to be able to do a shot, maybe a curved shot, maybe to dribble, maybe to advance, maybe to how to make short pass, maybe the short pass is bounced and hence they pass, receive, and then advance, which is just a very simple, misleadingly looking simple action that they may perform. So here in the spreadsheet, I'm giving you examples of different levels of analyzing what is happening in the sport. So personal action. When you're doing a personal action, you may consider who is involved or your own team. Like you are controlling the ball, and then you have to reason with who is potentially the receiver of your next pass. Okay, so you may form these little groups of reasoning that have to be coordinated. If you're not controlling, in the case of football, the ball, you may want to at the same time consider at least keeping the formation which the coach and the tactic which the coach has chosen, but also not letting the controlling player to have too much space, too much free space to act. Okay, so we already talked about the fact that you have to somehow keep a formation. With the formation, the notion of formation can be relative to the whole team, or it can be relative or relative to some parts of your team, like defense, midfielders, and attack, in the case certain team sports. Then there are even high levels. That is, what's the relationship between consuming energy overall relative to this match, because you may be inside a championship. So is it worth to burn the players completely for this match? Maybe the next one is just as important as this one. Or is it sufficient to get to a draw? Or is it absolutely necessary to win this game? And so on. So you see how many layers of analysis may be involved. Yes, another thing I wrote here in the spreadsheet is that action, you can characterize action at each of these levels as like, for example, they are active when you have possession or when you don't have possessions, and whether each of these you want them to make it possible in your game that they can fail or not. Like, for example, you could have a game where every easy pass, that is every short pass, never fails. Or everything may fail, but then if everything may fail means that you have to have a control on the flow and hence on time and space, which is very fine-grained. So, and we'll get to that. And this is one of the crucial moves that in front of all this complexity may make it still feasible to create a sports game. Okay, so we've seen all these possible layers of analysis, okay? Which of course you don't necessarily need to formalize, but at least you should be aware that they are there, and then make let's say conscious choices. Okay. Now, so for the AI, of course, you need to develop AI for each player, and then for each of the levels, entities like groups, defense, the whole team, and coaching that you want to develop. Now, basically, my suggestion is to create this notion of that at every tick of the game, we'll get to that. Each of the players has a set of possible ideas, weighted ideas, and which have all sorts of parameters and qualities, and then can decide. Some generated by his own personal will to do action, some generated by the different levels, and then one wins for each tick. Also, of course, there may be ideas that spawn several ticks and so on, but we'll get to that. But notice also that one thing that you'll probably need in games is that you need to make it possible for your AI not to be perfect, in the sense that you need to be capable of parameterizing how smart your AI is and in which conditions it may fail, because you may need to adjust to the skill level of the player, which probably will get better in time. And so to keep the flow of the game engaging, you need this parametrical AI. Okay. Now, for example, how could you reason in the case of a corner kick? Okay. So a corner kick, notice that, for example, the fact that you need to have special formation for special situations, at least in the case of football. So in the case of a corner kick, there are for each team defense and attack, and one is reaction to the other, very different kinds of formations, and also of shot. You can have a curved shot from the corner that goes towards the goal, or it goes outside with respect to the goal, towards the kick. So and here in this graph from the book Fundamental Sports Game Design, you see what are the states of the game that will change in time, which is when the ball is kicked, the ball is in the air, then you can have the different kind of states. The normal play continues, the corner kick is retaken, indirect free kick to opponents, direct free kick to opponent, penalty kick to opponent. So many things can happen according to how the kick goes. Of course, you can also model that the kick from a corner always somehow is successful, that is, and goes inside the penalty area, and then it's the following action that may have different outcomes. Again, these are all choices you may make. But in my notes I'm writing here, instead of modeling let's say a bit abstractly what is the state of the game, I would mostly model the state of the teams. and then I would focus the modeling on the state of each player. Otherwise, and so in this way you can somehow have a generative framework for what is the state of the action. Yeah, as I described here, team A is in state corner kicking, team B in state corner defend formation. There is no ball state. Yeah, I think it's this comes from I think a general mistake in making sports game, that it comes from the idea that basically you have to model the physics. In the case there is a ball, it's the physics that somehow dictates what is happening, but that is absolutely not I think a good approach. Good approach is to model what are the intentions, the ideas of the players and the teams, and basically professional sports, this is what makes it different, not the physics of the ball. The physics of the ball for me is like one of the last things to be implemented, and if ever, okay, and that it's the dynamic of the players and the tactics that will determine success. Okay, now I put a lot of accent on the complexity of the domain that we are trying to tackle here, but I found out that can be felt as a bit overwhelming at times. But actually, in my experience, if you focus, if you get this awareness, you do a selection of the layers that you want to model, and you get as quickly as possible to a highly parametric prototype, you will find that balancing the parameters in the prototype soon will generate something that looks like, that has the air, looks like the sport playing. In the sense it does not need to be perfect, the model, to give players the feel that they're actually this is the sport, and get the feeling for that. So be faithful. So, but what is the basic move? The basic move from understanding the complexity of the sport that you're dealing with, that the basic move that then can bring you to create an actual prototype, is reducing combinatorial complexity. Okay, and in particular dealing with removing somehow continuity. Okay, so my basic suggestion is the discretization of space and time. And in the case we talked, I think we start to understand what it could mean in space. But let's start with time. Again, in this spreadsheet, I've tried to give you some examples of what we mean by time in a sports game, and it's even more problematic than time in general in games, which is again, of course, problematic. I mean, there's the time that the player dedicates to a match. Usually in a video game, a match doesn't last as much as the actual match. Okay, so for example, let's say that if you look at very popular sports game, it's about 20 minutes. The maximum time you can ask for a match is about 20 minutes per match. Okay, now given that you have this, you need to somehow model the real-time duration of a match as a sped up time inside the game. Okay, and the time that it's running in the game can be, you have to make it possible to pause it in many different ways. Not just, well, if the sports like basket pauses time when the action is not happening, that's a case. But if it's like soccer, football, in that case time does not stop, even if there's no action in the game, but somehow the referee computes the time that has to be added at the end of each half. So again, you see there are many cases and many notion of time, okay? And of course, you have to formalize time. So the time of the sport as represented in your game does not have to depend on like frame update time or real time passing. Okay, so you have to somehow dedicate a part of your model to that. Okay, and in my case, what I strongly advise to do is to have your own, to create your own tick time. That is, let's say, a fixed time where all your AIs of all the players, the team, the coaches, and so on are somehow do one step and do one logical reasoning, and somehow so that each player decides among all the possible ideas what has to be done, and so somehow you can synchronize it across the team and across both teams and across teams and coaches and so on. And by doing this, you're making it possible for you to debug what is happening. And this is extremely important, that for you to make it possible to check out step by step what exactly is happening, because once you have 22, or in case of roller there'll be 10 players, and the referees and the coaches, everybody that is somehow reaching the conclusion about what they want to do, you have to be able to stop it, inspect everyone, and be sure that what your model in theory is actually working. Okay, and then consider other cases where you have to manipulate time, like for example, if you want to have a replay of actions, things like this. Okay, so there are so many possible cases where you have to be in control and handle time. Okay, I want to show you here how I in roller drama I have created a framework for inspecting what was happening and for controlling the tick. So actually, let me open Unity, so I'll show you. So I try to make debug tools available not just in the game engine, but also in the UI interface. In this way, you'll make it possible for testers and other people, and also for you when you're like putting the game on a tablet or stuff. So when you're not inside the game development environment, to do all your testing and things, and this can save you an enormous amount of time, and also you making it possible for you to share testing and so on. So always create a UI interface for your debugging tools inside the game. Okay, so in this case, I've stopped. I've opened the debug framework. I stopped the ticking, okay, of the game, so that if I do one tick, they do one action, one step of action, and I also can inspect each of the players. What are all the possible options that she's considering, possible action for the next tick, and what are the weights of each action, so also for a pivot, for the first blocker, and so on, and also for the other team. Okay, so if I do one tick, okay, they do the action that has one, and you see them moving, and so on, and so on, and so on. So if I remove tick by hand, now the action goes, she starts running, and so on. Let's make her jump too, and then I can open strategic actions. This is a bit in the way, and do, I don't know, do a wall. Okay, again, and then running and jumping and so on, and then again I'll put tick by hand so that I can follow with one tick. Okay, she's running, so she's covering a lot of ground in just one tick, and see what she's planning to do. And of course, this can be influenced in the case by the player by these real-time actions. Again, one tick, camera has moved on top again, because direction is another thing you'll have to deal with. And then again, one tick, and everybody's moving. They let her pass because it's their team, and now the other team will try to stop her passing, and so on and so on. Okay, I have other tricks and stuff here. I can change the AI level and so on. But anyway, so this is a really important tool, and of course you can develop this kind of tools only if you've put control over time, and you have created a notion of tick, and so you have made time something discrete under your control. Okay, but then after time there is space, and now we'll talk about that. Okay, so once you have time under control, you need also to control space, and you can do this by creating grids. Okay, so this is a very rough model I did for football drama. So I divided the football field into a grid, and so the units just move from one point to the other. Now, what you can do in your prototype, you can make the grid size parametrical. Okay, so that you can experiment with finer and rougher grids, and this can be very useful in understanding which is the level of which is the size of the cells of the grid that gives you that still makes it for you feasible to control what the players are doing and their movement, and without it being too rough. Let's see if I should have yeah, no, this was run at angles. If I have this little animation, so I had here a list of all the possible action corners, free kicks, and so on and so on, and then I just by selecting one of the buttons, I could replay and see what the eye of the players were thinking and doing, and so to in this case there's a free kick which actually is successful, and so one team's is very happy, they all rejoin the kicker, and the other one going to play for restarting play. Anyway, so this is the kind of tool that you can develop once you decided to have a grid. So that's a good idea. Now once you have a grid, and so there you were. Yeah, I shown you a grid in the case of a football field, but here in the case of a roller drama, I use a grid, and now in this case, something that is you have to consider is the fact that if you have a circular pitch, one of the many problems you have to deal with is the fact that every player is in fact in front and behind at the same time of any other player, depending how you look at it. So anyway, so here you can see with the debug grid turned on, which is another thing you should always be capable of. Make your grid visible in your development, so you can check how they're behaving in their movement with respect to the grid. And then, so once you have a grid, you can model what is the state of each cell, which can be very useful. And each cell should be, of course, aware which are the surrounding cells and whether there's somebody there, and so on. And another thing is again, I think it's very practical solution to have somehow that at the tick. So we have made time discrete so that we can, that allows many things. For example, you can have a complete description, and each player with the AI can be aware of the complete state of the game around them at any tick. Okay, which if you have continuity in time, which could be more problematic. In particular, some things I can suggest you that they be aware of is a player will always be aware how close is the closest enemy, or and how close is the closest ally, for example. And these are basic information which, if you have always there pre-computed ready, can make your code easier to read, which is always so important, in particular in the case of a team sport where you have a lot of code to maintain and so on. Another little tip I can give you is to develop the notion of center of gravity, because so that a player always needs to be doing something. Okay, so even if your team is attacking, you're a defender on the back, and they're not directly involved in action, which is debatable anyway. Still, you, like, for example, you need to the players need always to have some target. So so in the notion, for example, of relative position with respect to the center of gravity in that moment of the team or their section of the team, and according to the current strategy, what should be their relative position with respect to the current center of gravity, that is something that can lead you quickly to develop a prototype that looks like something sort of that gives an impression of a realistic play. So I think this can be a quick way to get to that. In a trick, this is a general game development tip, not specially linked to sports, is so we are used to using, I think everybody's used to using, have like parameters that go from 0 to 1 with the full continuity of possible values there. Okay, almost full let's say computable continuity of values there. But actually, I found that extremely useful to, instead of having like 0, 1, 0 to 1 parameters, have not only discrete but very finite kind of possible parameters in all the like the skill level or the speed level or their how much fatigue, level of fatigue, and so on and so on. And I mostly just use 4 numbers: there's 0, 1, 2, and 3. So in my games, all the objects can count only from 0 to 3, and this already gives you a lot of in the combination of all the players and all the choices and all the states. Already this generates an enormous amount of combinatorial space. So this could be a trick that you could use to somehow moderate the complexity of what's happening. So so once you have turned into adopt a discrete space with a grid and discrete time with a tick, with the two combined, you can have a complete control of what is happening at every moment. And also you can plan, each player can plan action. So like to dribble, that is a plan, dribble the player in front of me, it's a plan that can take like 4 ticks, or it's a sort of between 3 and 4 ticks, because I have to go on the left and then actually go on the right and then step forward and then complete, and then my action will be completed and so on. So you can start making plans once you have this simplified space into which they somehow run. Yeah, and so how can you get to a prototype? Well, at a certain point you have to make a lot of choices. Make a lot of choices in this framework that we somehow define, and adopt arbitrary boundaries. Like the attacking plans never involve more than 3 players. And then the other will just be in keep information with respect to the gravity center of the team, like thing. And other simplification. So set the grid size as so each one cell is actually as big as 1 player. So there's always 1 player in one grid cell. And for every player in each tick can only decide one action which may succeed or fail. Don't implement fouls and refereeing for the moment at the start. Assume that the ball is always in possession. This is going exactly in the opposite direction of having a physics-based model, which I strongly encourage you to think about before adopting it, because that's in sports is basically almost always like this. And in fact, this simplification probably could somehow remain in the final version of your game, and nobody will notice or care. Yeah. So of course, some actions cannot be completed may not be completed in the course of 1 tick. So you have to conceive of action that go across ticks, and then another problematic thing is that not only so an action can succeed or fail, but it can fail while across ticks. So it can be more complex than that. Okay. So this is for the model. Okay. Now for some suggestion about coding, something I develop games, more I become aware of is the fact that basically, as almost everything in games is complex, when you start developing the need of a new notion, don't try to force it into existing managers. Okay, so create specific managers for all the notions that you meet. Like for example, like direction, performance, replay, autoplay. I mean, these are just examples, but it's if you somehow encapsulate that specific behavior in a dedicated class, I think it's better. And another advice I'll give you is to keep the tick manager, so that the central entity that somehow ticks as clean as possible, because that will be the center for all your debugging and development. So just delegate all that you can to specialized managers, as this is something I already told you about. So put the debug tools, don't make it just available in the game development environment, but somehow create a UI in game so that you can play and test, and not only you, I mean also testers and other people, everybody can somehow, and also mobile devices and so on. So you can have debug on, send debug builds to people, and they can test it. Okay. So what will happen after and before the basic? That is, we've somehow acquired the tools to model the most diverse kind of sports and situations and so on, but then there are a lot of choices about the general game design of the sports game that you're about to make, whether you want to do single player, local multiplayer, online multiplayer, competitive, cooperative, league, have a championship, or no, just single matches and so on. And that, notice that what we've been modeling up to now can be compatible with all these choices. And also the mix of what is strategy, what is real time, what is simulation, emulation, and so on. And also these are all choices that you can make. Yeah, I mean, again, what is the player controlling? Okay, they're just controlling like the formation, the amount of energy they're using. They're controlling one specific of the athletes in game. They can control anyone they pick. The rest is moved by the AI. All these are decisions, and do not think that more control is better. Actually, for some games and some players, just watching an AI play can be extremely fascinating. Or sometimes having a very approximative control can be very funny, and so on. So there are many options here to be considered. Yeah, and then there is the problem of studying all the rules of the sport, which, if you ever get into that, like for example for basket or football and so on, there are many more rules than a casual watching of games will have made you familiar with. And so, but of course you need to somehow make the game understandable to the player, and so maybe you will have to select certain rules, some essential rules, and just discard some others. And so again, but this again must be an informed decision. So check out the actual rules of the game, which will also probably help you in creating the modeling, the mechanics of the sport. And then there are so many things that you may need to handle in the game, like saluting the crowd, what is the starting formation, and all this stuff. And then some things that we may not have considered in the start, like injuries, like the players that cannot play, fatigue, who is on the bench, substitutions, and things like this. Yeah, again here, and then there's the stuff around it. So the referees, like instead of having a full team of referees, maybe you could have only one. Then there's the crowd. How is the crowd reacting? Does the crowd influence the play? How is the morale of the player influencing their AI reasoning, and so on? And then there could be again more and more stuff like the weather. Is the weather influencing play? Because that's not too hard maybe to implement, because it can influence all the players in the same way or not. And then there are tutorials, and tutorials are always problematic because you may need to, if your game play results from the interaction of independent AIs of each players, but in a tutorial you need to be certain about what is happening. So you may want to have tutorials in game or before the game, and so on. But again, it's more development, more complexity. Something I did in football drama, I had commentators commenting the game, and again, every sports have a specific language for their sports, and lots and lots of idiomatic expression used in commentating the game. So again, if you want to do that, you need to study what's idiomatic. In the case of soccer, every nation has very different kind of idiomatic expressions, so it's a lot of work there, but also very fun and interesting. Now why if anybody has played FIFA, they know that the commentators, it's not exactly the best aspect of the game, but I think that's not actually just a mistake of the developer. It's the fact that basically when you're playing games, you're focusing your attention to certain aspects, to the center of control, where you're controlling stuff, and you don't want to be too much distracted. So the fact that commentators do not get a lot of development and attention, I think it's because the developers are perfectly aware that your focus of attention is not there, at least in that game. Okay, now Now we have made space and time discrete, and we know what's happening. Everything is under control, or not too much, because otherwise the AI is perfectly impossible to win against it, and so on. But anyway, there's a problem with this. There's a big problem with this. It is the fact that the discretization of space-time is not is the fact it's not realistic. It's not how events happen in sports. And also a problem is that when you develop prototype, if it's really basic with placeholders and just numbers for players and a discrete grid and so on, it will be very hard to understand whether it's good, it's nice, it's fun to play, because the aesthetic, the effects, the sound and so on, they give so much contribution that something that may look not so good in its rough form, when it has all the decorations needed, is actually good enough. So just keep this in mind, that you'll have to balance this. And of course, if you start developing a lot of refinement in graphics and effects early and the game is wrong, then probably what you've done is not useful, it's wasted. So you have to think about this and be careful in not wasting energies in this. So what you necessarily need to do at a certain point is to somewhat what in game dev is called juicing it, so giving a good game feel. So, and how do you do this? Well, as we have decided to make everything discrete, basically what's most important is to tween it. So that is to make every discrete movement actually look as if it was continuous and it has the right dynamic. And on top of that, you can add a lot of stuff. This talk is very nice, and actually in the material I'm distributing, there is also a Vlambeer's beautiful screen shake demo, which you absolutely must check out, because it can teach you a lot about how to add game feel to the game. Okay. And yeah, these are all, like, for example, of ease curves in the movement. So clearly an example when you're kicking a ball, how you want it to have effects, but also how players move from one grid cell to the other, and when they're accelerating, decelerating, what makes them look natural or funny, depends how you want to do that, and so on. But I think that having a discrete approach and then adding easing is way easier with respect to making start from a physical model. And one mistake I encourage you not to make, which I did several times, for example in football drama, is to assume, but we became partially aware of this in the end of so we found a way to moderate the problem. The problem is actually still there a bit, in the fact that on a UI, on a game, typically in a sports game, you have a lot of information changing all the time. But you can assume, which is okay, it's not a problem, that the fact that you can have, like in roller drama, we have a map of what is happening, at the same time you're following the jammer going around to it. But what's important for me, I think, is the fact that you cannot assume that the player is focusing as their center of attention on more than one thing to scan. So if the player is looking at the ball, and the ball is moving, they will only see the ball, and it's okay if the map updates, if there are side effects of that. But if you assume that they will also scan those, you're probably wrong. Okay. And then, of course, the tweening of the movement, but also the animations of, I'm not an expert at all about that, but it's very important how the models and the representation of the players are animated and move and stretch, and when they're going around. So there are a set of animation which you can define for each of your player just inside the grid cell. Okay, so to give some dynamic and movement, then of course this will be integrated with the actual movements and so on. Then there are so many other stuff around that to make the game pretty. For example, we've seen already this, but the camera movement and lights are of course in games so important, and in sports in particular. Having a good camera movement and follow up that looks like a direction human using a camera, usually, well, the case of Unity has nice built-in handling of the cameras, and again you should develop a sort of AI that for the camera changes and movement and tweening between the cameras. Okay, I think this was it. So it's a lot of stuff, but you can find in the video and post all the links to the material, and I hope that this will help you quickly create prototypes without wasting too much effort, and finding the right balance between discretization, continuity, realism, and fantasy to create your sports game. Thank you.